Hi, greetings, welcome. Thank you for joining us this afternoon to the ROI and quality webinar, where we will dig into where you can find data for building value. So before we begin, a quick housekeeping item. After the webinar, everyone will receive a link to the recording. And if you have a question, please feel free to use the question box in the GoToWebinar panel. Here's a quick overview of what we will cover today. Joined by me, I'm Jennifer Bianchini on the product marketing team at ETQ, and I'm joined with David Isaacson, and he is Vice President of Product Marketing at ETQ. So today's webinar is a little bit different than other webinars. We will dive into the values that support an ROI for a QMS. We will start with a quick overview of ROI, how to strategically approach a quality ROI, and data. What types of data we typically see that drives an ROI based on research and interactions we've had with customers. Then we'll show you how we can help you optimize an ROI for a specific quality project that you might have coming up. We will also have time at the end for questions, but please, we would love for this to be an interactive session, especially since we have a little bit of a smaller group today. So feel free to jump in if you have a question. And then just one final note, we will not be getting into pricing today because that is unique for each organization. Each ROI will be unique and tailored to your specific project. So we'll put that on the back burner for today. So now what I'd like to do is turn it over to David and we can begin.
Great, thanks, Jennifer. We want to get into this, as Jennifer said, this is a little bit different type of a webinar than we normally do at ETQ, where we want to work with you and help each person on the call understand the value of what drives return on investment, and especially what will make a great quality management project. So the first step is to really understand the key business drivers and the key metrics that go into quality. And we'll talk about those different metrics, and we'll show you the structure of what goes into the details of a quality management return on investment as we go through here. And then we'll be able to create that basic ROI model. What we're going to ask is, we're going to present a whole lot of different pieces of information that you may know some of the answers to, you may not yet know the answers to, and so collecting all that data, or as much of it as you can, we can work with you over time to help build out that ROI model and understand the value that the different ROI projects that you are looking at, the QMS projects, the quality projects you're looking at, and how how you can move forward with them. So with that, let's go to the next slide, Jennifer. And first thing I want to talk about is, how do we take what we use and know as quality professionals every single day and translate that to the language of business? When we look at some of the things we talk about today, right? We talk about APQP, we talk about quality audits, Six Sigma, FMEA, and so forth, right? But what we really want to do is start to think about what that means to the business. And if we click through a couple of clicks here, I think it is, Jennifer, what we get to is, rather than the items on top in yellow, we start to think about what the business really looks at. They look at margins, they look at expenses, they look at revenue, they look at profit, right? But they also look at cost drivers. And we as quality professionals really have an opportunity to impact those cost drivers. Things like warranties and recalls, scrap, waste, and which all lead to things like inventory and inventory carrying costs. Those are within the quality management's purview. And believe it or not, it becomes really visible in terms of how we look at scrap, waste, warranty, recalls, and things like that, because they start to show up before a public company. They start to show up in our annual reports. Inventory is in there, costs are in there. So what we can see is the direct relationship of those items to what the business really cares about. So that's why we really want to look at that and look at how do we reduce the cost of poor quality? How do we make sure that we're driving value for the organization? Quality management more and more is coming out of being this just this cost center in the back that sometimes stop things from happening, to really being a strategic business partner to the business to help drive both top line and bottom line. Okay. And so when you think about what I just said, we're not talking about investing in quality just to save money. We're talking about investing in money to help improve the top line, the revenues, as well as costs. And we're looking at more productivity, helping get rid of some of the drudgery work that might take place on a day-to-day basis. We're looking at happier customers because we got better quality products in the market, and also being able to bring products to market faster. A lot of this comes down to how do we make sure that we're investing, especially today. We know there's a lot of economic headwinds and there are things that are in the way of investing. So what we want to do is help everybody understand how to put the best case forward for making an investment in quality at this point in time, especially when the organization's also trying to balance between probably competing needs. I mean, money is not an endless pot when it comes to our companies, and so we have to invest wisely. So we're trying to help you put forth the best argument possible for a wise investment. And then on the next slide, we just see, how do we align the conversation, right? When we think about reducing the cost of poor quality, things like reduced scrap, rework, and complaints really is about improving quality and profitability of the company. And you can see that, from streamlining operations, it's getting rid of some of these manual time-intensive processes, or reducing the risk of non-compliance, improving audits, in terms of reducing the number of audit findings and having better outcomes from those audits. But from the business perspective, it's being able to demonstrate compliance, being able to show regulatory compliance, and also being able to respond to customer requests from an audit perspective. And then finally, driving and protecting revenue. We're talking about things like non-conformance and product failures and reducing those. We're delivering products on time, on budget, that are of the highest possible quality. Okay. So what we're going to do, it's more of a workshop type of an approach going forward here, where we're going to demonstrate how to find and use data that's out there, how to best highlight the value of ETQ to your key stakeholders, and where to find the data within your organization. So I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer now to start us on that journey.
All right, thanks, David. So before we dive into the information to build your ROI, we'd like to point out that if you don't have all of the data, that's okay. We have benchmarks that are provided to help you start the process. How we came about in creating these benchmarks is we worked with a third-party company to create them. They interviewed 12 ETQ customers, and everywhere from discrete to process manufacturing. The company size varied from enterprise to mid-market, so this created a nice, well-rounded sample set. And the goal was to understand the value that they received from ETQ Reliance. And with that data, we used it to build an ROI model that helps us, and it helps you to come up with the ROI for your project. So we do have one area for the ROI calculator in which benchmarks are not available, and it needs to be your unique information, which you see displayed here. So these are the key variables that help define the ROI for a specific project, and it's tailored to your needs. But the key things such as reducing the cost of poor quality, streamlining operations, reducing the risk of noncompliance or driving the revenue, we want to make sure we understand these items. So when we think about compliance, a lot of times it can come from audits, and we want to understand, for example, how many auditors are working, conducting audits, and how much time it would take for them to do an audit. Another area is document control. How many people do you have working in document control? Because that is a core function that we see a lot in quality management, and we see that a lot of organizations are focused on it. Another area is how many customer complaints do you receive a month? That's something we like to take a look at because you need to react to them, and resources are dedicated to that. For a supply chain, how many supplier deliveries do you need to look at and inspect every month? That's another key piece of data that we like to take into consideration. And again, all of these data points are used so that we understand, and it can help set up an ROI for a project. And as I said before, I'll repeat it again because it really is important. It's okay if you don't have all of the data points. You can skip it or give it your best guesstimate, and we can always go back and refine it later. So now I'll turn the next part over to David.
All right, so what we want to do is step through a few of the other variables that our customers, that users of a quality management system have found valuable when looking at the return on investment. First of all, where did they see the value of a QMS? And then how can we leverage that to really define that return on investment? So on the screen, you see a number of variables. We'll just step through each of these really quickly. The first is time spent planning and reporting each audit. We're looking at just the number of days per audit, because if we can reduce that, then we're going to start to save time, and we're going to start to save some money and free up people to do other things. Now, one thing I do want to mention is that we're not looking at how do we necessarily reduce headcount. What we're looking at is how do we think about freeing up people from doing, as I said, the drudgery of work, and give them the ability to focus on more strategic activities. So first of all, time spent scheduling, planning, and reporting on each audit. The next item is average number of audits conducted per year per auditor. Now, one of the things that I should mention at the bottom of the screen, you see some stats that pop up there. When we did the survey of our customers, what we found is there was some variability between each customer, as you would expect, in terms of how much time they spend. But across all of the customers, we got some averages, and then we went a little conservative as to where we feel the benchmark needs to start. Again, your numbers could vary, probably will vary, but if you don't have a number, you can't find a specific data, you can always start with the benchmark and say, here, this is not an unreasonable number as my starting point. So in this case, number of audits conducted per year per auditor, we had anywhere from 30 to 40. We went with 10 to start with as a conservative number, and so that's why you see the 10 there. The next one is the average time spent supporting external audits. How many hours per audit per person? In this case, we found that it was up to 40, which is what the interview average was. How many audits were supported per year? This is internal and external. So, are you being audited by your internal auditors? Are you being audited by customers? Are you being audited by regulatory agents such as the FDA or OSHA or others? You need to make sure you're covering all of those. Followed by the average number of people who support an external audit, because this is where we find more time is spent. So in this case, it was 2 to 3. We started with 2. Now, once you have an audit and you have a finding, there's a cost to remediate. And what we found is that the range of remediation was anywhere from $2,500 to $10,000. In this case, we went in the middle. We said it was about $5,000 for remediation. If it is an FDA mandated audit finding, so if you're in a life sciences business and you get an audit finding, it can certainly be a higher number for that remediation. And then when we think about remediating, how many different findings typically come out of an audit? We had anywhere between 7 and 12. On average, we went with the lower number of 7 in this case. So that's the risk of compliance. That was some of the compliance numbers. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Jennifer to talk about streamlining operations.
Thanks, David. So first is the average amount of hours spent on document control per week per person. You can see from the benchmark provided that reflects a more conservative number. The customers that we interviewed with for this information, they estimated it to be about 10 to 15 hours a week. Next is the average amount of hours your teams are managing non-conformance material instances. We learned from our sample set of customers, they spend 1 to 3 hours a week. The benchmark we provided is 2, so we've gone in the middle ground of that for you to utilize. Moving on, the next data point is the average amount of hours with the help desk or with your customer service teams managing customer complaints. So you notice we went a little bit more conservative with 5 hours for a benchmark listed here. And then next, we are looking at supplier deliveries. What is the average amount of hours spent a week on receiving and inspecting deliveries? If you have this information, great, you can go ahead and enter it here. If not, it's a conservative number of 5 hours a week is provided. And then wrapping up, streamlining operations is corrective action. We have an average amount of hours that organizations spend creating them and managing them. We listed 40 hours for a benchmark that can be utilized. And then moving on is reducing the cost. David, if you want to take over here.
Sure. So what we've just talked about in those first 2 areas deal with saving time, which a lot of organizations look at more of as a soft cost. And when we look at these costs, we're talking about more hard costs. However, and there's one word of caution, or not caution, but just one word of definition, is that not all organizations think of those previous 2 items, those previous 2 sections, as just soft costs. In fact, we're working with an organization right now where they are looking at audits and streamlining their audits. That's a big area of focus for them. And one reason why they are looking at the quality management system is they want to streamline audits and reduce the number of auditors they need to hire in the future. So for 2024, they actually had headcount 2 new hires. By going with the QMS, with ETQ Reliance, they have identified that they don't have to hire those 2 individuals. For them, that turned into a real hard cost savings because it was already budgeted. They'd already expected to have to spend that money, and now they know they don't have to. So working with your finance teams will help understand whether something is a hard cost or a soft cost to your organization. Again, as we go through here, all these variables, all these different data points relate directly to how you operate. And so that the model is going to be unique and the results are going to be unique to each organization. So when we look at some of the hard costs, there are 3 here that we're going to highlight. The first one is the average annual scrap and rework cost. We look at that as a 0.5% of revenue. We know that some of our customers have seen higher savings there, but 0.5% seems to be a reasonable and conservative estimate at this point. The second area is the annual field failure or warranty cost. So once a product gets into the field, what's the cost of taking care of a customer who's got a problem with that? So this is what we talked about, complaints that we get from the field. How do we manage that? How do we deal with warranties? How do we deal with return material authorization and all that stuff and all the costs that go along with that? Again, we're looking at, from a conservative estimate, about a 0.5% of revenue. And then finally, the inventory carrying costs. If your scrap and rework is high, then you need more material on hand to cover the yield that you need to meet market demand. And so in this case, we're saying it's about 1%. Now, these numbers are made up. as an example. But again, this will be about 1% of revenue that's impacted by the quality management system, and so you'll be able to calculate out a number there as well. So that's reducing costs. And now I'd like to turn it back over to Jennifer to talk about the revenue side of the ledger.
Thanks, David. So this is the final category for collecting the data to build your quality ROI. And that's, as David said, growing and protecting product revenue, so reducing the time to market. The first data point is your estimated revenue from a new product introduction. The ETQ customers we worked with provided their estimated NPI equaled 30% of revenue growth, but you'll notice a benchmark that you see provided here is more conservative at 10%. And finally, managing the amount of time in months your organization spends developing a new product. We learned from our sample ETQ customers, they spend 9 to 12 months, but the benchmark provided is the lower end of that. So now I'm going to turn it back over to David, and he's going to take us through the fun stuff, a summary of the results.
Right, so as we collect all this data, we want to see what the results are going to be. So what does this all tell us from a return on investment? Now, as we said, we're not going to get into pricing, and your pricing is going to be unique to your environment and what you need to license for a QMS. But what we've done is we've taken a model, we've taken a sample, and just to show you how we break this down, we have a couple of different areas on this screen. One is, what's the payback period? In this case, our payback for the investment for the quality management system was about 6 months, which is a real nice return. And then when I talked about, what we look at, the costs, and then Jennifer talked about the revenue as well, we want to look at those separately, because what we run into is that while it's really easy to justify the cost side of the equation for ROI, it's not always as easy to prove that or convince the organization that there's a huge upside in revenue. So what we try to do is show you that even if you don't take revenue into account, you're going to get a good return on your investment with the quality management system. Then the revenue just becomes more like gravy for the organization, and you get additional benefit that you didn't even take into account. So that's what this is showing, and we show you the numbers. We show you a bar graph of that over the course of, in this case, 3 years. ROI can be calculated out for any length of time. We go up to 5 years if you want, and so forth. So that's the first slide in terms of looking at the overall return. The next slide shows us how this breaks down by the different areas that we just talked about, right? So we looked at the reducing the risk of non-compliance, the operations, reducing costs, and growing and protecting revenue. And it's good to see how the model breaks down. In this case, we see that streamlining operations was the largest area, followed by the risk of non-compliance. And we show that, and again, the numbers in the graph. That way, everybody can understand where the impact is really coming from. And we can look at that also a little bit differently. Remember, I talked about hard costs, soft costs, and on the next slide, we can look at the cost savings versus the productivity improvements. So we can break those down even. In this case, for this model, we had about 2/3 of the improvement coming from productivity, 20% from cost savings, and just under 20% from the revenue improvement. So we can see where those drivers put us, where those different variables that we went through come into play in terms of showing an ROI. And then we can even break it down further on the next slide to show you specifically where we're seeing the bulk of our improvement. So we've highlighted a few areas. In this case, audits. Remember, I talked about non-compliance being a key area for one of the customers that we're working with. And so I just want to pull that out. Receiving and inspections. We didn't talk a lot about supply chain. However, the supply chain is really critical in quality management, right? Where up to 80% of the value of the products that are being produced in organizations today and manufacturers today come from the supply chain. So a supply chain problem becomes a product problem. So we want to also help focus in on some of that areas where we can see improvements in the quality of the supplier products that are being delivered. And then I said also, remember that scrap and rework and inventory, those become really visible. So we want to make sure that we have a focus there. In this case, for this particular model, not a huge amount saved, but again, we're also going to be talking about fairly large dollars that could be impacted here. So it's an area to keep an eye on. And then finally, we bring it all together in a summary slide for the executives, for your C-level, for your approvers, project approvers, for your budget approvers, who are going to want to understand the value of the investment we're making. So this all comes back to how do we make sure that we're getting the value out of our investment that we're making in the QMS. And so that's what we are really striving to help our customers understand, our prospects understand, where we can drive that value. So we've gone through a lot of detail right now. We've gone through a lot of information. I'm going to let Jennifer talk a little bit more about helping you find the data, where you might get this information if you don't already have it in hand. So Jennifer, turn it back over to you.
Yeah, thanks, David. So now, as David mentioned, we're going to shift to where you can find the information that you need to build your quality management ROI. So we recommend utilizing the departments within your organization who have the information to help you. Develop the relationships and work with the stakeholders in the finance and IT teams or the auditors. You can start small by asking, hey, can I be invited to a team meeting? And then you have the opportunity to observe and learn. Or you can ask for time on their calendar, a reoccurring meeting, and that is an opportunity for a two-way conversation. You can learn their terms and processes for tracking the financial health of the organization. Learn what metrics are they reporting up to senior leadership. When you understand this, then you can script these metrics, say, for example, into your language for cost of poor quality and help to influence the bottom line. So as you are collecting the data for the ROI, if there's a line item that we've gone through today that doesn't apply to your organization, that's fine. You can still move forward to build it out. And just keep in mind that this is just one tool that can help you fund a QMS initiative. And as always, we are here to help. Your ETQ representative can provide you with the guidance you may need to build a quality ROI in a language that your business leaders will understand. They can help put the picture together, highlighted in dollars and cents, and the payback your organization will receive with a QMS solution such as ETQ Reliance. So I'll do a quick time check, and we're doing good on time. And then, I don't know, David, do we have any questions in the chat box?
So let's give everybody a chance to enter a couple questions if you want. Just use that the GoToWebinar widget on the right-hand side of the screen. There's a questions section there. Feel free to enter that in. Let's see if we've got, it looks like we got at least one question here coming in, Jennifer. Let me see. The first one that we have here, let me just read this off. How do you help your teams outside of quality understand something like poor quality? How do you spread the word? Do you want to take that? You want me to take that?
Oh, if you wouldn't mind, thank you.
Okay, sure. The idea is when you think about poor quality and you think about, scrap, rework, and other costs that go along with that, the idea is to show and I always like to talk about ripple effects, that the cost of poor quality, and the things that you see are just the tip of the iceberg. That when something doesn't work right, or when you've got poor quality, it ripples through an organization. It takes more time. We talked about streamlining operations here, but it can take more time to remediate, to take care of that. So you need to get more people involved. And as Jennifer started talking about, reach out to other organizations and make sure that everybody understands the impact that poor quality has on them. Think about one of the pictures that we always see when it comes to cost of quality is an iceberg, right? There's a little bit that's above the waterline, and those are the things that you see. You see the scrap and the rework, but you don't see all the other costs that are below the waterline. And it's surprising how far and wide the cost of poor quality can reach. So it's being able to quantify some of those activities and the actions of other functions and how they impact or are impacted by poor quality. Okay, let's see if we have another question here. I think we've got one more right now. So another question is, how can I get consensus to implement a quality management system? I know we've talked about one aspect, that's the ROI side of it, but how do I overcome the politics, for example? And so, there's a couple things. One is, again, everybody understanding that there is a problem, right? Do you know that quality is poor, or is there an issue with quality? Do you need to look at how do you remediate things, and what's currently being, what's driving the organization from a quality perspective? And then how do you start talking to everybody about common processes and being more consistent? So it's really looking at what's driving the quality today, and you get past some of the politics by showing how, even if you have different factories, how people in different factories, for example, or different locations are impacted by the same things, and if they have different policies or different processes, how that could be a detriment. So how do you come together and align across those organizations? And then the financial impact really helps take it out of the politics. You've got your ROI, you've got your impact of poor quality, and how does that impact the organization? Because if I can show a top line and bottom line improvement, and I can show, especially if I'm a public company, that we're improving the position of the company to investors, for example, then the C-level in the organization is going to be much more amenable to doing something and to taking action based upon that. Okay, let's see. It looks like we've got another question. Here's, how should the ROI narrative to management be approached when there already is an EQMS in place and the proposal is to upgrade it? That's a great question. And when we look at a lot of legacy systems, you have to understand your own situation, but if you've got an EQMS that's focused on one area, or you've got multiple instances that are used in different locations, you have to look at what the costs are. So one area we didn't really cover is what the cost to maintain the QMS might be today. And so we need to make sure that we're thinking about, are we getting the most value for our investment in the system itself? Or if I have multiple systems, am I paying multiple license fees? Am I paying maintenance fees? How involved does my IT team need to be? Things like that. We also want to look at the capabilities of the EQMS, and are there functions in there that we aren't, either they don't have or we're not leveraging today, and we need to make that investment, and we can take what we have and think about expanding the capabilities and investing in additional features and functions. And it doesn't have, so we don't have to look at necessarily the whole system at once for an investment, but look at individual projects that might enhance the QMS that we already have in place. So there are a couple of different ways to really take a look at the investment that you might need to make in the EQMS today. All right. And I think that's what we've had today, Jennifer. I think we've got a good start here. I would say to everybody that, think about the data, think about what you've seen today and the information that we covered. I know we covered it very briefly, very quickly. Certainly reach out to ETQ. We can help you with putting that together in a model and identifying what the actual ROI, what the actual payback, what the actual value you can get out of the QMS, and that you can then take forth to your management and say, look, this is where we should be investing. This is a real value driver for the organization. It's not about quality being a cost center. It's about quality being a profit center or even an investment center for an organization to really take your teams to the next level. So thank you, everyone. Appreciate your being with us today. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
And we'll talk to everybody soon. Take care.
Bye.